Being framed for a crime you didn't commit is a terrifying prospect. Your freedom and dignity taken away, your pleas of innocence falling on deaf and uncaring ears. Whether the result of a corrupt or overeager police officer, a sadistic enemy, or a criminal wanting to deflect attention away from their own wrongdoing, there have been a disturbingly high number of cases where people were framed for terrible crimes they didn't commit. Number 5. Nathaniel Richardson. While the thought of being framed by a corrupt policeman, a bitter enemy, or a cunning criminal is terrifying enough, being framed by your own wife, the woman you had chosen to spend the rest of your life with, is a whole other level of disturbing. But that's exactly the nightmare situation that Nathaniel Richardson found himself in. In May 2013, Shannon Richardson contacted police to accuse her husband of being the man responsible for mailing threatening letters which had been laced with ricin poison to several prominent politicians, including Mayor Bloomberg and even President Obama. The typed letters warned the men to stay away from gun law debates and were coated with ricin, a highly potent poison of which a dose the size of a few grains of salt could kill an adult human. The letters warn the men that, "You will have to kill me and my family before you get my guns," ending with the chilling threat that, "What's in this letter is nothing compared to what I've got planned for you." Mayor Bloomberg was a critic of current US gun laws and a campaigner for tighter gun controls, as was President Obama, so it initially seemed as though the poison letter campaign was being conducted by somebody keen to protect their gun rights. Although the letters were intercepted before reaching their intended targets, 3 members of the NYPD were exposed to the ricin, suffering terrible symptoms, which later subsided without any fatalities. Shortly after the letters had been sent, Shannon Richardson contacted the FBI to implicate her husband Nathaniel in the crime. She claimed to have found a container filled with a strange substance in the refrigerator, along with internet searches related to ricin on his computer, as well as the mailing addresses for Bloomberg and Obama written on a note at his desk. Posing as a woman shocked by what she had discovered, Shannon Richardson portrayed her husband as a hate-filled bigot who was a well-known racist that despised the country's first black president. Presented with such damning evidence by none other than his loving wife, Nathaniel Richardson became the prime suspect in the case and was taken into police custody, the shocked and no doubt distraught man insisting on his innocence as his world collapsed around him. Nathaniel was adamant that for some reason his wife was falsely accusing him of sending the poisoned letters, yet it seemed as though all the evidence pointed to him. After all, why would a devoted wife set her husband up for such a serious crime? Yet despite the case seeming to be straightforward, investigators began to notice disturbing inconsistencies in Shannon's statements. At the time the internet searches were made and the letters themselves dispatched, Nathaniel was proven to have been at work. Shannon was given a polygraph test to verify her claims, however she failed the test, and police went on to unearth evidence that she was the one who purchased the materials needed to make the ricin online, obtaining an email address, PayPal shopping account, and post office box in her husband's name without his knowledge. The setup of her husband was clearly premeditated, and she eventually confessed to mailing the poisoned letters and was arrested at the family home. The question on everyone's mind was just what could have motivated her to frame her own husband. She was pregnant with her husband's child and had 5 other children from previous relationships who were now being cared for by Nathaniel. The answer is just as bizarre as the crime. Mrs. Richardson was an aspiring actress who had obtained minor parts in several television dramas, including The Walking Dead, and believed that setting up her husband and being the one to turn him in would make her famous, and therefore could help her acting career. The couple were already experiencing problems with their marriage, which seems to have spurred her on to sacrifice her estranged husband's reputation and freedom in the name of her own fame. Unsurprisingly, the shocked Mr. Richardson filed for divorce before Shannon was finally convicted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Her wish for fame finally granted, but perhaps not in the manner that she had imagined. Number 4. Randall Dale Adams. The idea of being framed for a murder you didn't commit by the very man guilty for that same murder may seem like something out of a Hollywood movie, but the events that led to Randall Dale Adams being placed on death row were very much real. In November of 1976, Adams ran out of fuel while driving home from work. Stranded on the side of the road, he was offered a lift by 16-year-old David Ray Harris, who was driving a car he had stolen from a neighbor. The two went on to spend the rest of the day together before Harris dropped Adams off at his motel. Later on that same night, Dallas police officer Robert W. Wood stopped the stolen car. As Officer Wood approached the car, he was shot and killed by Harris, who sped off before Wood's partner could respond. The police investigation into Officer Wood's murder eventually led back to Harris, who had bragged to friends that he had killed a police officer. However, when interviewed about his boasting, Harris said that he had just been trying to impress his friends, but when detectives revealed that the murder weapon had been identified as the pistol he had stolen from his father, Harris changed his story. He now claimed that he had in fact been in the car when Officer Wood was shot, but was merely a passenger at the time, and it was Adams, a hitchhiker he had picked up earlier that day, who had committed the murder. Adams was taken in for questioning by police, the terrified man denying any knowledge of the crime, yet it seems as if the police were over-keen to prosecute Adams, despite a lack of evidence. Some have pointed to the theory that when a police officer is murdered, authorities will demand the most severe punishment possible, and as Harris was only 16, he would be ineligible for the death penalty, whereas Adams was not, making him the preferred target for justice. In what must have seemed like a nightmarish turn of events, David Harris, the real killer, was offered immunity in exchange for testifying against the innocent Randall Adams. This testimony, coupled with those of questionable eyewitnesses, led to Adams' conviction in 1977, and the man was placed on death row, where just 3 days before he was due to be executed, the governor commuted his sentence to life in prison. Randall Adams spent 12 years languishing in prison. However, the 1988 documentary film, The Thin Blue Line, highlighted some troubling issues with the trial, which, coupled with David Ray Harris's later admission that Adams was not even in the car on the night of the murder, would eventually result in Adams being released and his case dismissed. The documentary's investigation revealed that 3 of the witnesses in the trial had been coached by detectives to name Adams as the killer, and even that robbery charges against one of the eyewitnesses had been dropped after they agreed to identify Adams as the killer. Officer Wood's partner even said that she had only seen one person in the car, a statement which contradicted the official story and was illegally withheld from Adams' defense team. Harris would go on to be executed for a later murder he committed, while Adams was released but received no compensation for his lost years and the hell he had been through, tragically dying of a brain tumour in 2010, but living on as a terrifying symbol of just how fallible the criminal justice system can be. Number 3. Barry Gibbs. The police are entrusted with the kind of power that makes them attractive targets for organised crime, and a disturbingly high number of officers have found themselves in the pockets of mobsters and criminals who are constantly looking to buy influence with police departments around the world. It was against this backdrop of bribery, corruption and lies that Barry Gibbs would find himself unjustly robbed of the freedom so many of us take for granted. After a woman was found strangled to death in New York in 1986, the case was assigned to Detective Eppolito, who quickly brought Barry Gibbs in for questioning after discovering that he had previously had a brief relationship with the murdered woman and worked at a deli near where the body was found. He had already established a link between the suspect and the victim, and after a local jogger who saw the woman's body being dumped fingered Gibbs in a police lineup as being the man who dumped the body, it seemed to be an open and shut case. Gibbs was arrested, and while being held in jail, an informant gave a sworn testimony that Gibbs had confessed to being the killer. Based on the testimonies of the informant and the jogger who had witnessed the body being dumped, Gibbs was convicted for murder and sent to prison for 22 years. However, there were some troubling flaws in the evidence used to convict him. The jogger described the suspect as being 5'6" and 140 pounds, yet Gibbs is far heavier and taller than this. There was also no DNA evidence linking Gibbs to the murder, and the statements of jailhouse informants are notoriously unreliable, yet Gibbs continued to languish in prison, repeatedly denied parole for not showing remorse, as he continued to maintain he was innocent and had been framed. It must have seemed as if all hope was lost. However, 17 years later in 2005, Detective Eppolito was arrested after being connected to a well-known mafia crime family and accused of passing on information about police investigations and even taking part in mob killings. A search of his home revealed the original Gibbs case file illegally stored, and so the case was reopened. The jogger who had so many years ago pointed out Gibbs in the lineup was recontacted by investigators and admitted that Eppolito had forced him to finger Gibbs, threatening to harm his family if he didn't testify against Gibbs in court. Much of the original evidence relating to the case had also mysteriously been lost or destroyed. It seems likely that Eppolito had framed Gibbs in an effort to protect the real murderer, who may have been connected to the crime family who were pulling his strings. And so based on these new findings, Gibbs was released from prison after spending 19 years behind bars, the nightmare he had endured finally coming to an end, his tale serving as a chilling demonstration of just how easily one crooked cop can ruin an innocent man's life. Number 2. Seemona Sumos. The series of events that led to Seemona Sumos being unjustly imprisoned seemed too far-fetched even for a low-budget TV show. However, the innocent woman found herself targeted by her ex-boyfriend Jerry Ramratan, who masterminded an elaborate plot to frame her for a series of robberies, which resulted in her being jailed for 7 months before the truth was finally revealed. The pair had originally moved in together, however the relationship soon became abusive, and in 2009 she reported him to police, alleging that he raped her. When she refused to drop the charges, Ramratan used an intimate knowledge of police procedure, gleaned from countless hours of watching shows like CSI, which he was known to be near obsessed with, to frame Sumos for a series of fake crimes he meticulously staged. For the first crime, he persuaded an illegal immigrant to tell police that he had been handcuffed and robbed of $700 by a woman matching Sumos' appearance, tempting the man with promises of a special visa which victims of violent crimes are eligible for, which would enable him to stay in the US. 6 months later, a second crime was staged, in which a man was once again supposedly robbed by a woman matching Sumos' appearance. However, this time he was able to provide the first 3 letters of the license plate on the getaway car used to police. Unsurprisingly, these letters matched Sumos' vehicle. The third staged crime involved a friend of Ramratan, who told police that she had been robbed by a couple who were pretending to be police officers. Again, the description given matching Sumos. All of the evidence seemed to point towards Seemona Sumos, and she was arrested and placed in a lineup where the first victim positively identified her as the woman who robbed him. Sumos was indicted and jailed while she awaited trial, her desperate cries of innocence falling on deaf ears. She insisted that her ex-boyfriend was trying to frame her so as to discredit the rape allegation. However, she found no sympathy with police, who thought that she was simply making the story up, despite her having a strong alibi for the time when one of the 3 crimes supposedly took place, her cell phone records and CCTV footage showing that she was in a casino at the time. Just weeks before her trial, the nightmare finally came to an end. An unnamed informer came forward and admitted that the whole case against Sumos was faked. The informer gave police the number for a cell phone owned by Ramratan, which further checks revealed had been used to call the witnesses in each of the 3 robberies, suggesting that he was involved in them somehow. When police re-questioned the witnesses, they all confessed, revealing that Ramratan had either bribed or threatened them into taking part in the plot. The case was dropped and Ramratan was given 32 years in prison. However, Sumos had lost her business, house, and faith in the justice system that was supposed to protect her. The terrifying tale serving as a sickening demonstration of just how easily one twisted individual can manipulate the justice system into ruining an innocent life. Number 1. Timothy Evans. Upon discovering that his wife Beryl was pregnant, Timothy Evans began searching for a new place to live for his soon-to-be expanded family, and eventually settled on a top-floor apartment at 10 Rillington Place in West London. However, unbeknown to Timothy, his downstairs neighbour was none other than John Christie, a serial killer who had already claimed the lives of 2 women, and who would go on to not only claim the lives of his wife and daughter, but also frame Timothy for their murder. After moving into the new apartment, the young couple quickly began to experience problems in their relationship, and neighbours often overheard their heated arguments, especially over money. So when the couple discovered that Beryl was pregnant with their second child, they decided that they simply could not afford another baby, and sought out an abortion, a practice which at the time was illegal in the UK. It's likely that they were approached by Christie, their downstairs neighbour, who offered to perform the abortion from his apartment. This was his usual method of operation, posing as a backstreet abortionist to prey on vulnerable women, lure them into his apartment before making them inhale gas to knock them unconscious, where he would assault them and strangle them to death. The couple decided to accept Christie's offer, a decision that would doom their entire family. On the day the procedure was due to be carried out, Timothy Evans returned home from work to be told by Christie that something had gone wrong and that his wife Beryl was dead. Christie advised Evans to disappear, as being the husband he would be blamed for his wife's death. offering to dispose of the body and ensure their infant daughter was taken care of by another young couple he knew until things had calmed down. Foolishly, Evans agreed and fled the city, yet concern for his daughter led him to eventually come forward to police, where he falsely confessed to accidentally killing his wife while attempting to perform the abortion himself, before disposing of her body in a nearby drain, arranging for his young daughter to be taken care of, and then fleeing the city. He was not only in a state of shock, but was also later judged to have had an IQ of just 70, and was therefore classified as on the borderline for having a mental deficiency. And he also had a long-term running history of inventing stories about himself to boost his self-esteem, a trait which could explain the false confessions and contradictory statements, and would severely damage his credibility with police. To investigators, it seemed like a straightforward case. However, when police examined the drain where the body was supposed to be hidden, they found nothing, instead learning that the manhole cover was so heavy it required 3 men to lift. So Timothy's story did not add up. After being re-questioned, he changed his story, revealing Christie's involvement in his wife's death. Police searched the house and eventually found the body of Beryl Evans and her young daughter in the wash house in the back garden, both murdered by strangulation. Yet, crucially, despite examining the garden, police failed to find the buried remains of 2 of Christie's previous victims, a find which would have exonerated Evans. After being told that the body of his wife and daughter had been found, Evans apparently confessed once again. However, he would retract this confession, and it would later be revealed that the confession had been pre-prepared by police, with threats of violence used to coerce him into signing it. Timothy Evans was put on trial on the 11th of January 1950, all the while insisting that Christie was the man responsible for the murder of his family, a claim which the court dismissed as being fantastic. Apart from his previous contradictory statements, there was little evidence to pin the guilt on Timothy, and the prosecution case largely centered on the testimony given by Christie, who was their key witness. Christie portrayed Timothy Evans as an angry, violent drunk, and gave detailed statements about the heated arguments that the couple would frequently have. With the trial largely coming down to Christie's word against Timothy's, the jury sided with Christie, who was seen as a respectable member of the community with no motive for murder. Based upon these witness statements given by Christie, the man who had killed his wife and daughter in cold blood, Evans was found guilty of murder and hanged. However, 3 years later, the bodies of 3 women were found at Christie's house by a new tenant, and after a more thorough police search of the property, another 3 bodies were found, including that of Christie's own wife. Christie finally confessed to the murder of Beryl Evans, and was himself found guilty and hanged by the same hangman who had executed Evans 3 years earlier. Although the truth had finally been revealed, the news came too late for Timothy Evans, who was granted a posthumous pardon, the tragic case one of several that contributed to the eventual abolition of capital punishment in the UK in 1965. So those are my choices for 5 times people were framed for crimes they didn't commit. Let me know in the comments which other cases you would have mentioned, and I'll see you again next time.